so we're going to look at an impulse example. It reads, a 20-gram ball of clay is thrown horizontally at 20 meters per second towards a 1-kilogram block sitting at rest on a frictionless surface. The clay hits and sticks to the block, and they travel off together with a velocity of 0.39 meters per second. What is the average force the clay experiences from the block if the collision lasts 0.01 second? And what's the average force the block experiences from the clay? All right, so here's our situation. We have a ball of clay. We said it has a mass of 20 grams, so 0.02 kilograms. And it is moving with a velocity of 20 meters per second. It's given as a positive, so it's moving to the right. And it hits a block stationary on a table, frictionless surface, and they slide off together. So initially, the clay is moving and the block is stationary. In the final condition, the clay and the block move together. Now, the question itself is asking about the force that the clay experiences. Well, the clay experiences a force because of an interaction with the block. This interaction causes the clay to change its momentum, and so we have an impulse going on. Remember, an impulse is equal to a change in momentum of an object. We know that this is the object we're interested in is the clay ball. That's the one we're seeing the momentum change in. The block is also changing momentum, but it's asking about the clay. So we know that this is the final momentum minus the initial momentum of the object. And we also know that that is equal to the force, the average force, times the time. So, what is my final momentum? Well, it's the mass of the clay times the final velocity of the clay minus the mass of the clay times the initial velocity of the clay. That's going to equal my force times time, and I'm interested, of course, in force. Well, I can pull the mass of the clay out, so I have the mass of the clay, final velocity of the clay minus the initial velocity of the clay. That equals the force times time. And I can divide by time, and I get a relationship for the force. So now I can plug in my values. The mass of the clay is 0.02. The final velocity of the clay, well, we're told they move off together at 0.39 meters per second. The initial velocity of the clay was 20 meters per second. And all of that is happening over a time of 0.01 seconds. So just to remind you, we had the initial velocity of the clay was 20. The final velocity of the clay was 0.39. And the time of the impulse is 0.01. So that equals our force. So our force is equal to 0.02 times 0.39 minus 20, all divided by 0.01. Negative 39.2 newtons. All right. Is that appropriate? Should it be negative? Well, what's happening to the clay? It's moving, and then it slows down. Well, if it's moving to the right and slowing down, it has to experience an acceleration to the left, and that acceleration to the left is caused by a force to the left. Part B asks us what the average force the block experiences on the clay. Well, they're an interacting pair, so the average force has to be the same. And so the force the block experiences by the clay has to be the same as the force the clay experiences by the block, but of course in an opposite direction. Good job.